Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Selkirk Mountains of Okanogan County, Washington, has multiple cave entrances, with one having been blasted shut, but the most popular being McLaughlin Canyon Caves. A while back I found a single document from the 70s from a team of spelunkers from University of Washington that had spent over a week underground exploring there, finding streams and lakes, but no evidence of an end, before they called it quits. The geology to the area is of great intrigue as well, being some of the oldest mountains on the continent, and the difference in age and composition of the mountains is very distinct and obviously different from the next set of mountains on the other side of the rather narrow valley, the Cascades that is. Anyways, there's a lot of local rumors of such underground military activity in the Okanogan Highlands, as the part of the Selkirks that are in the US are known, and without knowledge of the geology or the fact that the entire airspace above the whole county, which by the way is larger than 3 states, but with only a few tens of thousands of people widely distributed for the most part, with the largest city of Amak being just around 5,000 give or take, and the next county over, Ferry County, one of the least populated in the state, being mostly pretty extreme mountain wilderness, is military above a certain altitude, although they commonly will fly jets just barely above the treetops within canyon ridges all throughout the mountains there. The military makes multiple public claims as to what they do around there, and it is not just one thing, category, nor is it one single branch of the military that operates there. A lot more to it, but I'll leave it at this for now.
When I was a kid growing up in western Pennsylvania, there was an old abandoned railroad in the woods near my house. The railroad went through a valley with a pretty large, winding creek. There were several cuts and tunnels through the hills of the ravines and valley on either side of the creek. I'm pretty sure this railroad closed down in the early 1900s, and by the 1980s it was overgrown with the tunnels in a pretty advanced degree of collapse and looked more like natural caves. Needless to say, this was a perfect area for playing and exploring the woods for a kid. From a kid's perspective, pretty sure most parents wouldn't want their 11-year-olds exploring abandoned railroad tunnels. One year we had an exceptionally warm December and I had a few friends staying over at my house for Christmas break. Of course I wanted to take them down to the railroad tunnels. I probably hadn't been down there since summer. As we are approaching one of the tunnels, we get stopped dead in our tracks. In front of a tunnel we see this gray, skeletal figure holding a scythe. We take off running back the direction we came. My neighborhood was about a half-mile to a mile away, mostly uphill, and we came bursting out of the woods breathless in one of my neighbor's backyards. He's out doing yard work, and obviously is curious as to what we were up to. We tell him what we saw, so he assures us we did not indeed see the Grim Reaper, and offers to go back into the woods with us. So we all went trekking back down to the creek with my neighbor. We come to the tunnel and sure enough, there he is. Skeletal figure, gray, wearing a black cloak, a distorted, twisted body and holding up his scythe, which looks like it is an extension of one of his arms. He is just standing there, motionless, silently, guarding the mouth of the tunnel. My neighbor motions for us to hide, and he and the Grim Reaper have a stare down which seems to last forever. The neighbor starts laughing, to the degree of tears coming out of his eyes, and he has to sit down, and tells us to come out and see. It was a tree that was hit by lightning. The trunk basically exploded. The bark from the tree was still attached in places that appeared to be his cloak, and the twisted, exposed portions of the trunk appeared to be his body, head, arm, and scythe. It probably happened a few months prior and the exposed trunk would had weathered gray already. Even now knowing what caused it, it still was super freaky to look at and still made us nervous, so we were happy to leave. This thing was so perfect it almost looked like someone had carved it with a chainsaw, but the wood was too rough and split for that to have been the case, and it was a completely natural phenomena. A few months later, I returned with a camera and some other friends to show them the Grim Reaper in the woods, but it was completely gone. I could not even find remnants of the trunk or root system from the tree, just vanished. It may be of note that we would often find satanic graffiti in the railroad tunnels, pentagrams and such spray painted on the stone cliffs and walls in and around the tunnel. It also appeared that lots of people had used the tunnels to have parties, get high, etc. As we would sometimes find syringes and burnt spoons and the likes. I probably haven't been back down to check the area out in 20 plus years, but keep telling myself that one day when I'm home to visit I'm going to take a trek back in the woods to see how things are holding up.
I've been curious for years if anyone has ever seen the creature that crossed my path in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I was a senior in high school, so it was 2011. My group of friends and I were always obsessed with haunted, creepy things, places. I think our interest began as kids. We lived across the street from an abandoned mental asylum that we would regularly sneak into. So naturally, when we heard about Downingtown's twin tunnels, we were psyched to go. This place is still on a drivable road. It's 2 attached tunnels with 1 active tunnel and 1 completely grown over with brush and water. Kind of like a swamp. They are pretty long and curved, so there is a point in the tunnel where no light can enter, making it pitch black. Legend has it there have been some deaths and murders there. Supposedly a pregnant woman hung herself from the middle of the tunnels. And years later in the 90s there was a woman's body chopped up and found stuffed in a suitcase, which was placed in the tunnels. So according to folklore, if you walk through the tunnels at night, you emerge from the other end with scratches on your arms. Or, if you drive through it, as we did, you could hear the feet of the self-ending pregnant woman dangling on the top of your car. So we go. I'm driving. We drive through a few times, park in the middle, turn the lights, car off, roll down the windows and wait to see anything. It's a bust at first, and since I'm driving I'm ready to call it a night, but a friend eagerly says one more try. So that's what we do. I park in the middle, turn the lights and car off and sit there silently waiting for something to happen. Now since this is still an active tunnel, I remind you, I have my key in the ignition ready to be turned on in an instant so that if a car comes speeding down I can quickly turn the car on and flash the lights to let them know we're here. So I'm staring at the mouth of the tunnel when all of a sudden I see a dark figure walk across the mouth of the tunnel. I'm amazed, mind you. Almost don't believe it, until it turns into the tunnel and starts walking directly towards the car. I can only describe it as an extremely tall humanoid figure with broad shoulders, long arms that dangle almost down to its knees and a rectangular-shaped head with no distinguishing features, just completely black. At this point it's getting closer and I'm so freaked out that I instinctively turn the car on, the lights flash on, and the thing vanishes. I immediately turn to my friend and he says, "Did you just see that?" And I reply, "Yes." Although it feels nice to have another person validate what I had just seen, it has left me completely uneasy for years.
I have had a similar experience, and what I saw, I would almost describe the exact same. Several years ago an old friend and I were walking on this bike trail in northwest Arkansas. Oddly enough, she had made a comment about how it was a strange night and mentioned that she was feeling weird. It wasn't long after, we heard what sounded like a baby crying or like a cat wailing in pain in the tree line next to the bike trail. Our first thought was that there was either an injured animal or possibly a mama cat in labor. We skimmed through the trees but found nothing. We took a few steps forward when a humanoid creature stepped out from the trees and began to cross the bike trail in front of us. It was probably close to 7 feet tall, extremely slender with knobby knees and elbows. It was all black with long arms that hung past its knees and slightly hunched. We only got the side view, but from what I could tell it had no facial features at all, and it did have an odd-shaped head, but I would say more of a diamond than your rectangle that you saw. I remember its head coming to more of a point. It was so long-legged that it had walked out of the tree line, took one step in the middle of the bike trail, and then with the other foot he had reached the other side and disappeared into a fence. The girl I was with looked at me panicked and said, "What do we do?" Because at this point, it would continue past the creature, return around and run back past whatever was wailing in the trees. Needless to say, I ended up saying run. And we turned around and did not stop running until we ended up back at our apartment, slamming the door behind us. I actually went back the next morning, because the way it vanished into the fence almost seemed as though there had to have been a hole in it the creature walked through. But when I went back it was nothing but a solid fence the whole way down. No sign of anything from the night before.
The premise of the account. Boys go into the tunnel, find a leave now note upon exit, get followed by a stumbling creature that runs off on all fours. Creature returns to dance around a fire. Boys drive by it with one of their mothers who sees it take off very fast on all fours after it yells unintelligible speech at the boys when they yell and throw the sign at it. This would have been in late summer of 2018 in southeast Missouri. I would like to note that I was not an eyewitness to this story, but it has been corroborated by 6 eyewitnesses that describe the same thing. This story has been told to me by my younger brother and his friends, which may lead some to question its credibility, but it was also partially witnessed by one of the boys' mothers and sister. In a nearby town, there is a collection of softball fields in a residential area. My brother's girlfriend at the time was playing in a tournament there. And, out of chance, he had friends with sisters or girlfriends also playing there. I have been to these fields as a teen, and there are usually lots of kids and parents around during a tournament like this, approximately 300 to 500 people I would guess on average. The boys would all have been around 15 or 16 at this time. Apparently, one of the boys was aware of a tunnel entrance nearby the fields. How he would have known about it is beyond me, because it is pretty obscure. Regardless, it does exist, and I have stood in the entrance of it myself about 2 years after all of this took place. It is about 8 feet in diameter. The boy who knew of the tunnel told the others, and they walked over to it. The entrance is in a small collection of trees, and you have to go down into a small creek bed, but it is still well within a quarter mile of the fields. This tunnel is part of a system that directs storm runoff to a large river. I have dug up maps of this system out of curiosity. I think the particular section they were in goes 4 miles or so, but judging from the maps I found, and not eyewitnesses, I believe there are many more miles of tunnels in this system under the town. The boys explained that as they followed the shallow running water into the tunnels by the light of their phones, the sun was just starting to set. They estimate they may have gone 2+ miles into this tunnel. At the entrance, they said there was lots of graffiti, and eventually there was no more. They went way past all of the graffiti and they saw no markings or signs of anyone having been in the tunnel until they reached the point they turned around. Occasionally, they would see smaller tubes joining the tunnel, described as barely large enough to perhaps wriggle into, and some of them would have a bit of water running from them. The boys reached one of these smaller tubes that was spitting out a lot of water. They had to run up and around the water. When they reached the other side, they saw written on the wall in what they all described as creepy handwriting the statement, 6 dead, 1 alive. This freaked them out. They were already feeling very anxious by this point, and they decided to turn around when they heard a noise behind them. They basically all panicked and ran back. When they eventually got to the entrance, the sun was starting to set. One of the boys happened to notice a 1x4 plank in the entrance with a piece of paper duct taped to it. It had the words, "Leave now," scrawled on it with this weird symbol that looks something like a circle with a jagged arrow going through it at a 45-degree angle. The boys postulated that the note was probably intended to float down to them, but got caught not very far inside. One of the boys picked up the scrap of wood and carried it with him. My brother said the others did not realize the implications of the note, and he had to point out that this meant someone had been watching them and might be right at that moment. This prompted them all to be scared and look around. They did not see anything, but they quickly climbed up out of the creek bed and, as they emerged from the trees, they got back on the sidewalk to walk back to the softball fields. They had not made it very far on the sidewalk when my brother noticed that they were being followed by a very strange being. They all were scared out of their minds when they realized this. They described the creature as being very tall. They approximated it to be 6 feet 5 inches in height. They said its shoulders were unnaturally narrow, and it had long, spindly arms. It stood hunched over with its arms hanging limp. The creature stumbled along on its 2 feet, falling all over itself like a drunk man, and was all over the sidewalk. It was dressed in all black, skin-tight clothing like spandex or similar, and had black gloves on. Between the sleeves and the gloves, they said there was extremely pale skin. Intriguingly, they described the head to be like a greasy, black pom-pom. There were no distinguishing facial features. This thing followed them, even though it was very unsteady on 2 feet, and they were freaked out enough by it that they hurried away and hopped the fence to the softball fields. Interestingly, the being did not leave the sidewalk when they did. It was almost as if it was stumbling along in a trance, they said. From the safety of the other side of the fence, one of the boys yelled out to it, "Hey, we got your note." The being seemed to snap out of its trance and bounded up a steep hill on all fours at an incredible rate of speed into another patch of trees. The boys were dumbfounded by this. All of this should have been in full view of the softball fields had anyone been paying attention. The boys ran back to one of the boys' mothers who was present and told her what had happened. She scoffed in disbelief until, at some point, this thing wobbles out of the trees and starts a fire in an open field right across from the softball fields. This, too, was in full view of anyone paying attention. The boys said it seemed to start the fire instantaneously, leading them to consider it may be some kind of demon or something. I guess the mother saw all of this and was intrigued, perhaps because she is a bit of a religious fanatic. All of the boys loaded up in her car with the mother and sister, and she drove them past the creature. The mom was dumbstruck. The thing seemed to be dancing in a wobbly, unsteady fashion around this fire it had started. They rolled down the car window and yelled to the being, and threw the sign at it. Its head snapped to look at them, even though they could see no identifying facial features, and it yelled back in unintelligible, garbled speech. Apparently, this really seemed to disturb the boy's mother who was driving, and the sister, who screamed in terror. This caused the being to take off, yet again, on all fours, at an incredible rate of speed into the trees. Today, whenever they talk about this event, they refer to him as the Gorillaman because of the look of the hair covering its head like a black pom-pom. I happen to know an older guy who grew up in that area, and he was not aware of the tunnels or any such creature. Some of the explanations the boys have proposed were a possessed human, a demon, an alien, or that it is some kind of cryptid creature. A couple weeks after the sighting, the mother, who had apparently been shaken, had discussed it with her husband. The husband, who is a bit religiously fanatical as well. I say this because they are convinced it is a demon or related, was enamored by the story, and started digging for information. I guess he had found a newspaper article stating there was a dismembered body found in the exact group of trees that the creature ran off into found only weeks prior to the boys seeing it. To this day, I have no idea what they saw, but some of the descriptions here seem to be somewhat similar. I do find it odd that this thing was out in the open. I must say that starting a fire in this area is just plain strange, but I think it would be totally unheard of for a cryptid to do so. I'm of the persuasion that it must have been a crackhead or something, but the boys are convinced its movements and proportions were not human.
I'm sure this story is unbelievable if you were not there, but it happened and is in fact only one of many bizarre occurrences in my life. This one is significant though because my friend was there as a witness to back me up. When I was in 7th grade, in 1989, my mom was transferred to Mobile, Alabama. My brothers and I used to skateboard, and we often skated at this concrete ditch a few blocks from my house. I estimate it was about 7 feet tall from the base of the ditch to the top at ground level. One day my friend Sam and I decided to follow the ditch into the woods to see where it led. We skated for quite a while along the bottom of the ditch, just following it as it went deeper into the woods and away from the houses. Eventually the ditch ended at a flat wall. There were 2 tunnels in the wall which continued forward. They were each maybe about 5 feet in diameter, with yellow horizontal bars in front of them. Well, the tunnels were pitch black and both of us stood silently there, trying to decide if we were brave enough to climb the bars and continue forward into the tunnels. After maybe 30 seconds, we suddenly heard a voice coming from the right tunnel. "Come inside," it said. We were both scared, and just frozen in place. Then more voices joined in. "Come inside, come join us," along with the sound of a shrill kind of reed instrument. We did not listen to the voices, but just stood there in place. Well, I guess these people realized that we weren't coming in, so they decided to come out. And the next part is pretty crazy. As we stood there, we saw 5 sets of glowing eyes inside that tunnel. They were moving up and down as though walking towards us. The glow was an intense whitish yellow. At this moment, there must have been a sudden break in my memory because the next thing I remember is 5 people are standing in front of us outside of the tunnel. They appeared to be a family of 5, an adult male and female along with 3 children. All of them were well-dressed, blonde and blue-eyed, and each one had a bicycle. I don't remember them pulling their bikes over the yellow bars, which would have been kind of difficult. The man held out a small rectangular object in his hand. I couldn't recognize it. He said, "The next time you hear this, you'll know it's us." I'm assuming this was the instrument sound that was coming from the tunnel. Then they got on their bicycles and rode away. Sam and I talked about that incident for a long time. We, of course, corroborated everything that happened with one another, and I'm pretty certain that if he was not there then I would have discounted most of this incident as imagination. The very first day we moved to Mobile, my mom drove by that ditch. My brothers and I immediately looked at one another and knew we were gonna go skate there. When we got to the ditch later that day, we were surprised to find scattered animal parts on the floor of the ditch. These were parts of a fairly large animal, like a large dog. The parts had no skin or hair and no blood whatsoever. They were just muscle and sinew and bone. Strangely, a lot of kids in that town told me that they were devil worshippers. I'm not a religious person, but I do find it odd that an unusual number of people in that town seem to be fascinated with the satanic side of the occult, even at a young age. Regarding the figures in the tunnel, they looked just like blonde-haired, blue-eyed humans. Their eyes did not glow when out in the daylight. The man and woman looked to be in their mid-30s, the children were a boy and 2 girls, and their ages appeared to range from about 12, the oldest, to 6, the youngest. They were all dressed nice, like a suburban family going to church. Which was obviously weird to see in a sewer tunnel. I paid particular attention to the youngest girl, because I was so confused as to why these people were in that tunnel, especially with a little child that young. She had dark circles under her eyes, and I immediately thought to myself, that kid looks like she's on drugs. If you would like my personal opinion, I think that these people were human occultists of some kind, and they were performing a magical ceremony in that tunnel. They were in the middle of this ceremony when we arrived. That is my feeling on the matter.
Years ago, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, myself and a few other friends were walking along a disused railway line in Scotland, which we had done previously many times that summer. Through a short tunnel under a bridge was the old station and ticket office, which had been empty and abandoned for some years with the roof partly gone. We would often climb inside as kids do. On approaching the end of the tunnel this Sunday afternoon, we could see smoke rising up from the chimney, and the building looked like it was fully occupied with doors open. We then caught sight of a man holding back a curtain and looking at us through a window. He had a large mustache, kind of Victorian style. I can't remember who spotted him first, I just remember bemusement then panic as we tore back through the tunnel. Can't explain it, but we all saw it. I can't remember if we ever went back to investigate, but I remember being driven over the bridge and looking down at the station sometime after, and the place was derelict.
This happened in Baltimore, Maryland. More specifically, Jones Falls Express Tunnel/Conduit. I don't know what this thing was. It appeared to be maybe 4 feet tall, maybe. Was about 15 yards from it, maybe more. Things are kind of hard to explain, being it was basically pitched black except a sewer light from above, and this creature looked a bluish gray. I saw the back of its head as it passed into a different tunnel. It looked like there was a dorsal fin on its head, and the body looked scaly. It had a long alligator-like tail and had legs like a monkey, but hairless. It made no sound, as far as I can remember, but the sound its feet made while running was heavy and had a slapping sound with each step. It was very fast, not human. I thought it was a human at first. I heard somebody running up from behind me and only had my cell phone flashlight. When I turned, I only saw the back half of its body as it was already running off into a different tunnel. I climbed the next sewer ladder out of there and have never seen anything like this. Any ideas as to what this could have been, and or any known cryptids in these area or region? I'm kind of taken back on words currently as I'm still slightly processing this shit.
This took place in 2007, and I was young, but even after all these years, I cannot figure out what the heck I saw. I truly have only told very few people because I fear them labeling me a nut. I am in upstate New York, and we were driving at night in a rural town. This was a little town we drove around in often, so we knew our way around, and we knew shortcuts. On this night we wanted to go to a party, and we chose to take a shortcut. Note, we were not inebriated at all. Ultimately, that was the goal of the night. This kind of messed those plans up. There was a small side street where you could turn left into a 1-lane tunnel to cut to the main road. At the end of the street is a lettuce field, which runs parallel to a visible railroad track behind it. There is a pole with a circular mirror pointing at the tracks, I assume for maintenance workers. This mirror is 10 feet off the ground. As we pulled up to turn into the tunnel, we stopped a moment as we were just talking, and we looked forward towards the field. I don't know what happened honestly, but there was this tense silence and fear that came over us, and we saw this slouched creature almost squatting and just stared. At that point, it was crouched down, and easily we could have thought it was maybe a deer or bear. But it turned its head, looked at the car, and its eyes widened in surprise. They reflected green like cat eyes, but huge. It stood up, and that's when we realized it had 2 legs and could see its shape. Someone whispered, "Turn the high beams on," and when we did, I was so afraid I couldn't even scream. It was very tall, easily 8 or 9 feet, standing up, but its spine was still visible as it was skinny, and it walked hunched over. You could even see hip bones in its shadow. Thing is, it seemed terrified as we were. It took off straight and ran into the woods, so we went flying through the tunnel so we could get parallel and maybe catch another glimpse, but it was gone. Like we had scared it off. The whole drive ended. We went home. I tried to make jokes about it being anorexic Sasquatch, but it didn't change the feeling we felt. Just absolutely shaken. It was like that moment of fear zapped energy from us. It was almost black-skinned, even as it began to run in front of the high beams. It also appeared hairless, although I didn't rule out maybe some body hair. Its features were difficult to make out past the eye shine, but I almost want to say human-ish. I perceived its expression as afraid, but it was literally just a gigantic, tall, very thin, almost emaciated creature. Its head was round with no snout, but also fairly large. I wish I'd have gotten even closer, but I was so terrified, and the encounter felt like we both interrupted one another.
I've lived in Idaho all my life and spent a lot of time outside or in the wilderness as a kid. My grandparents would take me camping, and my older brother and I would always hike up whatever trail we could find to get a view of the sunset. On one of these occasions, something terrifying happened. We were up at a campsite I only know as Warm River. The river there never freezes over, and my brother and I were on a regular evening hike. There was an old tunnel bored through the mountain at one part of the trail, probably an old train tunnel, and we were walking through it when I heard something I'll never forget. After walking probably 2/3 of the way through the tunnel, I heard a terrible screech at the end we entered through. The screech wasn't like anything I've heard before. I've heard the screams of animals on dark and windy nights. I even think I've heard Bigfoot calls a few times, but never the metallic, grinding screech I heard that day. The point is, whatever the sound was, it did not sound natural in any capacity. I probably jumped 5 feet in the air when I heard it, and my brother shouted a few choice curses before shooing me quickly to the exit of the tunnel. At this point, my brother decided we should just continue walking and head back after whatever made the noise hopefully cleared out. We didn't have any firearms on us, so I was pretty upset. My brother reassured me we would be fine, and we made the walk back without incident. However, I didn't get any sleep that night. Whether it was the thing that screeched at us or just my imagination, I heard things moving around the campsite the whole night, as well as whispers echoing through the darkness outside the trailer. I woke my brother up a few times to check out what it was, but he refused each time, telling me that it was probably just other campers staying up late and enjoying themselves. The rest of the trip was pretty normal. We packed up the following day and my life continued as normal. I was disconcerted but chalked what happened up as a harmless event that I must have been exaggerating in retrospect. A few weeks later I went up to Pine Basin, an old ski lodge my family rented each year for family reunions. Here I would mess around with my cousins, our favorite activities being night games. We would play hide and seek, a game called Ghosts in the Graveyard, and other games like that. In one instance, I was chosen to be the seeker for a hide and seek game. Because I was one of the younger cousins, I got a flashlight as an advantage. Normally, all the younger cousins hid close to the lodge and the older cousins hid in the trees or at the base of the nearby mountain. As I was searching near the bottom of the mountain, I heard a familiar whistle up the mountain a bit. We would always whistle as a hint at our locations. It sounded like someone was hiding way up near a tree known as the underwear tree. You can guess why, so I began trekking up toward the whistle. As I climbed closer, I got an uneasy feeling in my stomach. I continued on warily, and convinced myself that I would be fine. I hated walking in the night alone, but figured whoever I found would walk me back to the lodge. As I neared the tree, I noticed that it was deathly silent. This alerted me that something was very wrong, because you could always hear the adults having fun back at the lodge. I was anxious to hurry back, so I called out, "I found you, Scott." I thought the whistle was my older cousins. "Come back down with me." I got no reply, but I wasn't planning on waiting. As I began walking back down the path, I heard a voice call, "You almost had me," so I ran back up to investigate. I flashed my light in the branches of the tree, and saw a monstrosity that was not my cousin. It looked like a poorly drawn stick figure made into a human with its emaciated figure and lifeless eyes. I remember its face looked like the skin on its head was being pulled from behind. It had torn and stretched features. As soon as I saw the creature, I screamed, dropped the flashlight, and ran back to the lodge. The entire time I ran I was overcome by an overpowering smell and I could hear the thing running after me. As I approached the camp I saw a few people, my cousins, at the bottom of the mountain waiting for me. I was crying and shaking and they took me inside. I told my dad what happened, but my cousins all said they didn't see anything following me. The adults kept us inside for the night, and I kept hearing sounds drifting in from the mountains. I never played night games after that happened, and was always terrified that my cousins wouldn't listen to my warnings. Ever since that night I have always felt uneasy up in those mountains. I used to be really religious and figured it was a demon of some kind trying to kill me or something like that, but those mountains have never felt the same after that incident. A few years ago the game, Until Dawn, became really popular and I watched a walkthrough of it on YouTube. When the Wendigo first appeared in the game, I got chills down my spine. It was exactly what I saw, and I did a ton of research on them. I figure someone must have gotten snowed in at that old lodge and resorted to cannibalism, but that doesn't explain what happened at Warm River. I still hear that screech from time to time. It never occurred to me until watching Until Dawn that they might be from the same thing, and it scares the hell out of me every time. I heard it earlier tonight, and that's why I decided to finally write my story down.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.